Well, hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are going to be doing something a little bit different today for the Apothecary Diaries. Mainly, we're just going to dive right into the episode, and we're going to talk about the book and the comments afterwards. The only reason for that is, as I've told people on Discord, which by the time y'all are watching this, I've recorded ahead, so you'll be like, wow, that was that long ago? It was indeed. My internet has been out for like 4 days now. It's fine. It's fine. But I live in a very rural area, so they are not too concerned about fixing the internet because it's not affecting a lot of people. So luckily I've had a hotspot that I've been using the past few days, but it's a doozy. It's a little hotspot. It has not got a lot of get up and go in it. And so things record very slowly, but I've wanted to get to this episode for a while now because we're starting the new core and I'm like, come on now. So I've got the video up and going and it is like loading, but I'm afraid the streaming service I'm watching it on does this thing where if you wait a little bit too long every now and then, it'll start the whole video over again, and I don't want to do that. So I have book chapters to talk about, I have comments to talk about, but we're going to save those for after the reaction and start out with that once I get the actual episode recorded. So that's the only thing different that we're doing this week. We're just going to dive right into the episode and save the rest of it for after that. So I hope that's okay. But I want to take advantage because it was kind of on a roll, and I'm like, okay. Also, because of that, if you're watching and for some reason I'm going to try to make sure the timer and the editing works out. But if you do notice like a second off or something like that, I'm sorry. It's trying to deal with this. I feel like most reactors record from like urban areas where there's just the internet's great, and I'm stuck in the boonies and the internet is what it is. So there's like one company and that's what you got. And so that's what I've got to deal with here. But hopefully by next week it will be fixed. I can only hope. But in the meantime, we'll just make do with what we've got. So we're going to go ahead and start this episode and dive right in. I'm so excited for episode 13. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And I'll see you all on the other side. Man, so welcome to Core 2. There's a lot going on. There is a lot going on, and I'm glad I got through that. I had to stop and start it a couple times, and then I remembered as the OP was going, I was like, wait, I don't have a timer on this one because y'all are watching picture in picture, so it actually worked out all right. But before we dive into this episode and talk about all the things that are going on, we need to dive into talking about The Last Eunuch in China because I've done reading for it and diving into the notes that I have from the comments section. One of the comments we're going to save for the actual whiteboard coon and discussion, and my dog has been super patient on me, but now I'm going to be like, look, dude, I'm not throwing this toy very much during this discussion because we have things we need to talk about. Anyway, so Lorelei Sherman 8663 pointed out, I asked a couple weeks back I'm not planning on reading the light novels. I'm going to wait till this is adapted into anime because I really like the anime. They said season 1 basically covers the first 2 books of the light novel. Good to know. So those are some pretty dense books. There's a lot happening in them. So that's really good. And then Cool Ice Princess points out that Lihaku, back when he gave MaoMao the hairpin, it was actually a consolation prize. So when Jinshi says he lost to a consolation prize, that line makes so much more sense now. Basically, the hairpins, Lihaku was just giving them out to women that he thought weren't going to get them from anywhere else. And I was like, wow, what a douche. He's a Labrador, man, but that is kind of like a dick move. And then, basically, whenever MaoMao was tasting the soup and having like the orgasmic face, he was mainly, he didn't necessarily think that she was pretty during the garden party scene. He was more interested in the soup. And I was like, wow. He can have the 3 princesses. He can give all his money to that brothel as far as I'm concerned. But this, oh my gosh, this episode's opening up a lot of ways for this author to torture Jinshi. This is opening up a lot of ways for our author to torture Jinshi. Just put him through the ringer this entire series. I feel like I'm going to be sympathizing a lot with his character as the series goes on. I just have that feeling. So I want to mainly go lay down, buddy. I want to mainly talk about the book before we dive into the last comment and talking about this, because there's a lot going on. So I'm a little bit over halfway done as we go now, but as I'm getting into this story, this is basically the parts that I've been reading is 1924. So it's around the time that Puyi, who is the emperor, actually gets expelled. So there was apparently, of course, this book is not supposed to talk about China's history. It's mainly talking about Sun Yat-ting's duties as a eunuch working for the emperor and the empress. So he doesn't really talk about it a lot, and I'm sure he maybe wasn't supposed to talk about it a lot. He briefly touches, though, on the fact that there was a civil war going on during the time all this was happening. And of course, if you've ever watched Grave of the Fireflies, or there's other examples of it too, but in movies and media like that, whenever there's chaotic stuff like war and everything going on, like in Sun Yat-ting's position, he's like, he had to worry about all this other stuff, and the rest of the world was not even in his periphery. So I think it's interesting that he talks about the Civil War and says there were two powerful military factions, the Fengshen army led by Zhang Xiaolin and the Zhili army under Wu Peifu's command. They were fighting their second war. At a crucial juncture, Wu's subordinate, Fang Yuxiang, suddenly defected, leading his troops into Beijing and issuing a peace telegram. The Zhili army collapsed. Fang's quote-unquote national army occupied Beijing and put Cao Kun, president of the republic, who had bought the votes for his election, under house arrest. This newly established provisional cabinet decided to revise the Articles of Favorable Treatment. He just basically goes into talking about that, but the point is they come to get the emperor expelled after this has all taken place. So the emperor is being basically outed from his position, and he kind of has, like, understandably a freak out about it, and comes to the castle and is like, what are we gonna do? How is this gonna work? And the eunuchs are all kind of concerned because they're like, well, what's gonna happen to us? Are we going to die? What's gonna happen to this? And what takes place in this chapter is essentially the military have shown up, and if they don't come out of the palace, the military who are armed are going to come in and remove them from the palace. So basically it's, you come out peacefully and come with us and we move you somewhere else away from the palace, or we come in and that's really not what you want. So basically things kind of get a bit chaotic, but Sun Yat-ting stays with Puyi and the empress as they pack up their things. He does go over and tell the other Wenzhou, the other consort, he's like, hey, all this is going down, and she acts so nonchalant. She's like, okay. she's like, oh, we get to leave now? All right, cool. But it's really sad. So Puyi ends up, they go to this northern mansion is where they're sent to. And what's really interesting is, like, Wanrong and Wenshu, they both, like, come out together. They leave with the emperor. They all get out of there. Sun Yat-ting makes a point of saying that several of the eunuchs were taking things from the mansion as they were leaving to presumably pawn them off later. And there's a bunch of gold that Wanrong, the empress, has on the table. And so what happens is that Sun Yat-ting takes half of the gold that's Wanrong's. He gives it back to her. He takes it and he's like, oh, these are her prized possessions. And so he takes them and he gets them out of the mansion along with her. And then when they get to the northern mansion, he's like, here's all of your gold back. And she's like, oh, thank you. The other one, whose name is Liaizang, takes the rest of the gold and then runs away, which is going to come back and play a part here in just a minute. But so basically that eunuch that worked for the empress along with several others just started looting the mansion and running off with the loot and abandoning the emperor and the empress, which is pretty crazy. And then there was a big sight as they were leaving. What was so interesting is a lot of the townspeople were like, oh my God, that's the emperor and the empress. They've come out of the palace. We can see them in person. And so you don't think during the story up until this point, but they really didn't go out in public, and the public had never seen the emperor or the empress, which is so crazy. And so now they were, like, on display, and they were trying to hide their faces as they were being exited from the mansion against their will, which was crazy. I'm surprised it goes as peacefully as it does, especially considering that an army has overthrown and is kicking the emperor out. I'm surprised it's as bloodless as it is from Sun Yat-ting's perspective. Now, we'll get into some parts that are not bloodless in a minute, but for the most part, they let Puyi leave the mansion and they don't cause much of a fuss. Now, what had happened earlier was that the high consort, Daojian, she was from a while back, she had died. And so they actually were in the middle of her funeral when all of this went down. And Sun Yaoting was actually kind of worried. He's like, hey, he's like, her coffin and her body are still on display in the mansion. This is like several days after they've been transported to the new mansion. They're like, we should probably do something about that, because they're like, it's been nice weather outside, but if it heats back up again, her body's going to start decay and smell, and it's going to be really not good. And so a lot of the eunuchs that worked for her, they wanted to honor her body and bury her. So they were actually they were allowed back in by the military to go and get her body and take it to the tombs and bury it, which I thought was pretty interesting. So what ends up happening that's very interesting in all of this is that throughout this process, while they're kind of on lockdown, what was interesting about this is that it was on page 149. Puyi, as he is in the Northern Mansion, the guards ask him, they're like, are you going to continue to regard yourself as an emperor, or are you going to become an ordinary citizen? And Puyi replies, he'll become an ordinary citizen. And the government's like, okay, we're going to let you hang out in the mansion until we figure out what to do with you. And they don't kill him. So it kind of like was one of those things of like, are you going to relinquish your power and become a normal citizen, or are we going to kill you? And he chooses to relinquish his power, which is crazy. So what ends up happening from there is that the consort Dao Kang, she was still at the temple, Puyi and the Empress, they decide to escape because they don't really like being at the Northern Mansion, and they're worried. They're like, if we stay here too long, even though we're citizens, they might decide to kill us, and we need to get out of here and go escape. And they find a place that is actually a sanctuary for them that's on the other side, that's not controlled by the government, that's taken over. So what happens is that Puyi, he basically goes up to the guard and he's like, I'm going to go visit my aunt and I'll come back. And the guard's like, well, what do you mean you'll come back? I don't want to let you go. And Puyi's like, well, I'm an ordinary citizen now, so you really don't have any power to keep me here. And the guard's like, I guess I don't. And so by him relinquishing that power, he saves his own life because he's allowed to go and essentially escape because the guards can't really keep him because he's not technically an emperor anymore. And then he ends up helping to get the Empress and Winshu out of there, and they leave the mansion too. Now, the problem with that is that they escape, but the eunuchs are all left behind. Like, they basically say that Wanrong took a couple of her handmaidens with her, but all the eunuchs were stuck in the mansion. The ones that stuck around that didn't just grab stuff from the mansion, loot it, and run. Sun Yaoting and all of them are still there, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? If they find out the emperor and the empress aren't going to come back, they're going to stop feeding us and we're all going to starve. So they manage to find their way out and go back to their own homes. But it's not a great picture because basically everything's disbanded. Sun Yaoting isn't making money anymore. The government gives them like $50 as compensation. They're like, here, leave. We don't know what to do with you. And so he goes back home. And what's really sad is that Sun Yaoting, he tries to do physical manual labor jobs, but he just finds that he's inadequate, that being in the position he's been as a eunuch for so long, he can't really do anything. He can't do the physical labor that his younger brothers are doing, and he doesn't really have any other way of finding a job in the rural area that he's in. He was kind of banking on working for the emperor. So he ends up going to the Temple of Prosperity, which is known as the Eunuch Sanctuary. It's basically where a lot of them are going. And on the way there, he runs into 3 of the eunuchs that he worked for back in the day. But it reads just like a movie. He runs into them and they're all like destitute. Like, it's been several months and they're all destitute. They don't have any money. They've pawned off all of the stuff they stole and they've used it all up. And so they beg him for some money off the streets, being like, hey, we were best friends. Aren't you going to give us some money so we can go get some food? And Sun Yaoting feels sorry for them. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I feel sorry for you guys. I'll just hurry and give you guys some money. It'll be okay. And this line got me. They're like, I don't have much. Sun Yaoting says, I don't have much money, but you can take this to buy a little food. And they're like, thank you, brother. See you later. At the sight of the coins, the 3 eunuchs smiled broadly and bowed. And Sun Yaoting watched them disappear into a nearby opium parlor. and a cold shiver ran down his spine. Would all the eunuchs end up like this? Would he join the ranks of the beggars one day? And I was like, oh man. So he's kind of like down on his luck. He doesn't want to stay at home anymore because he's not of use there. He doesn't want to end up destitute like his friends addicted to opium. He's like, I don't know what to do. And he ends up going and he runs into this eunuch named Zong. And he's like, well, why didn't you pawn off anything from the mansion? Why'd you give all your gold back to Wanrong? You could have had enough. He's like, you could have stolen something from the mansion and been set for life. And Sun Yaoting is like, I didn't think that was the right thing to do. And it wasn't my gold. He's like, I was working for money, but I'm not a thief. And we find out, the old eunuch, he's like, well, that's a good thing. Because we find out that several of the eunuchs that stole from the palace, when they went to go sell their goods, they were killed. So the one eunuch that had worked for the empress, that had taken her half of the gold with him, he ends up getting kidnapped, and the kidnappers finally killed him. And it's like, oh, Huckleberry! And so it's just... And in that moment, Sun Yaoting's like, no matter what happens, he's like, I'd rather be destitute and poor and be an honest man than be a thief and die with a bunch of riches. And the old eunuch's like, that's pretty much the way you're going to survive in this world now. So that's where, sorry to deviate so much, but that's where we're at in the book. And it's really, really well done. I was just like, the idea of the emperor getting ousted, it was a lot less bloody than I thought it was going to be. It was, for all intents and purposes in the novel, pretty cordial. I'm sure in real life there's a lot of liberties taken and things Sun Yaoting has left out of the conversation that aren't relevant to his story. But I did think it was interesting how a lot of the eunuchs that had coveted all of the mansion goods to try to pawn off, a lot of them ended up being killed as thieves. And so Sun Yaoting's like, yeah, that's not me. So, okay. But yeah, anyway. So what I'm getting to though with is the idea of Jinshi. I know the last couple episodes I've been like, is he or is he not a eunuch? My thing is, I guess the only thing keeping me from thinking he's a eunuch is MaoMao. I guess she's the only thing that keeps my brain from fully getting on board with it, because Bamsi pointed out, he was like, well, you know, seeing Jinshi be ripped and do all of these like practice sparring and stuff, he has a lot of muscle mass, you know, testosterone. Wouldn't a eunuch not have that? And I was like, no, it wouldn't. That logically makes sense. And then the whole Sun Yaoting chapter where he's like, oh, you know, I don't have any muscle mass because I was castrated when I was 6. I can't do all this physical labor that the other guys can do. And I was like, no, that all makes sense. I guess my thing is, MaoMao, we'll put her up here. We'll put old MaoMao up here. She believes that Jinshi is a eunuch. And she even talks about it in this episode. She's like, well, we could make an aphrodisiac out of his scent. And I'm like, oh, girl, what are you talking about making an aphrodisiac out of his scent? What are you talking about? So... which we'll go back to that moment. I was like, girl, but my thing is, she believes he's a eunuch, but also, does she realize, I guess she's confusing me as what she thinks Jinshi is. Does she realize that Jinshi is the emperor's brother, technically, / son in real life? Because she talked about in the one episode, whenever Aduo was leaving, she was like, well, what if the babies were switched? And what if that means Jinshi's the emperor's son? That's all conjecture, of course, so I can't make that prediction for real. But that means that she knows that Jinshi is the emperor's brother. So why does she think he's a eunuch? And why is she confused about him having his own palace and all this? He's the emperor's brother. Why wouldn't he have this? So her views of him have been, she just kind of says he's a eunuch and doesn't understand why he's busy all the time. And I'm like, well, he's the emperor's brother. What are you talking about? So I think what's confusing me is that her view on him is so vague and she doesn't want to talk about it in the show. And that's what confuses me. Because I'm like, it would make sense that he's not a eunuch. It would make sense. But then let's go back to that whole conversation. Because the whole thing with Jinshi and his brother dad is so interesting. I was so surprised because I did not think we would see Jinshi and the emperor together in a scene. At least not in episode 13. Not right after coming back from the cour. I was like, excuse me, what are we doing? So yeah, let's get back to this. I've got to reload the video because my internet sucks. So the Emperor is so mysterious too in this opening scene because he's just pouring wine for Jinshi and they're having these drinks. I can't get a good read on the Emperor at all. Part of me thinks that he's proud of Jinshi. Part of me is like, do you know that's your son? Part of me is like, are you proud of him and do you kind of like him because he looks like Aduo and you respect him like her? He's so damn mysterious and it's so problematic because I want to know more. But he's in his... They're not at Jinshi's, I don't believe. I think... Are they with where the Emperor's at? We need to go... If this thing will load and show me such things. But so the Emperor and Jinshi. I'll talk about Jinshi over here. So Jinshi's right here. He only has one servant. Well, besides Gaoshun. Technically, he has Gaoshun. And he has Suiren. His lady in waiting, right? So Jinshi's in his fancy robes. His, like, phoenix and everything, right? I like that his mother comes to drink with him, and now his dad's drinking with him. It's like, what? What? So he has this moment with him where they're just, like, sharing wine and such, like you do. And he's like, are you serious? So he says, what would you do? So I'm curious why Jinshi's asking him if he's serious or not. What was the proposition? What did the Emperor say? It's so crazy that Jinshi looks nothing like the Emperor. He really looks just... And that was my thing too, was I was like, well, Jinshi doesn't have any facial hair. He has very feminine features. So I'm like, if he was castrated at an early age, he would probably stay more that was the thing with eunuchs. But then also he's like kind of ripped. So is it just that he looks effeminate? He says, what would you do? You're the gardener maintaining my flower garden. Okay, so Jinshi has been assigned as the gardener to maintain, quote unquote, the garden. For the record, I hate that the women are referred to as flowers in the garden. I get that it's the way that system is set up, but it's just the ick factor is there for sure. Like, gross. Definitely goes along with the metaphor of whenever MaoMao's talking about women being assaulted, it's just the foot over the flowers, not paying attention as they crush them. I guess if you're looking at it that way, at least the Emperor's trying to keep them satisfied and in good graces, I suppose. And Jinshi is there to maintain and make sure they're all happy, I suppose. But here's my thing too that's so confusing with this setup is if Jinshi is not a eunuch, then the fact that the Emperor trusts him, that's my thing too about it. Because it seems like people in the comments are trying to be like, he's not a eunuch. And I'm like, but then why is he trusted in a society where... That's the part that's so crazy to me, is that if he's not, eunuchs are the only ones allowed in the rear palace because they're not a threat to the Emperor, which leads to why MaoMao thinks that he's a eunuch. If he's not a eunuch, the Emperor's trusting him that he's not going to be attracted to any of these women or try to do anything with them, which granted, if he knows Jinshi, then yeah, Jinshi's not interested in any of those women because that's not the type of woman he likes. So there's that, I guess. And he's just, but the way he strokes his beard and says that, and Jinshi just smiles, that persona customer service smile with his glossy lips, and the Emperor just kind of smiles back at him, and Jinshi's like, he's truly cunning. So it almost feels like, I don't know if the Emperor's letting him be around the women in the rear palace because he knows Jinshi can't try anything or go against his will, because then... would that reveal he's not a eunuch? Does everybody else think he's a eunuch? Who doesn't think he's a eunuch? It's so confusing. And he's like, he truly is cunning. And anytime somebody pours you a glass of wine, it's like, he's like, how ironic. No matter how hard I try. And so here we have like Jinshi when he's a little kid who would have been raised thinking that he's the Emperor's brother when in fact he's his son. He says, no matter how hard I try, both in intellect and in martial arts, I can only slightly outperform a regular person. Instead, I'm granted an appearance more beautiful than anyone. So Jinshi thinks that he's average. He's average, supposedly, in martial arts and in intellect, which I feel like Jinshi's selling himself short. He's been practicing martial arts. He's kind of buff. He seems like he's doing fine. He seems like he's relatively smart, but he doesn't think that he is. Instead, he thinks that he only has his good looks. Instead, he thinks it's just his appearance that makes him desirable. And then he's like, the things I truly want are so far out of reach. So I'm very curious. That begs the question of what does he want? I mean, he wants to be with MaoMao, obviously. But that's not only what I think he's talking about or talking about at all in this situation. So I'm like, does he want to be a military officer? Does he want to have, does he want to be alongside his brother dad? Like, we don't know what Jinshi wants exactly. He just says the things I want are so far out of reach. I'm like, what does he want? To me, it feels kind of like a subversion of, it feels like there would be normally the trope of the pretty woman. It's kind of like Legally Blonde, I guess is the best way to put it, because Elle in Legally Blonde, she's kind of ridiculed and she's kind of like pigeonholed because she's pretty. And whenever she's like, I want to become a lawyer, they're like, oh, you can't become a lawyer. You're just a pretty girl. Just stay in your lane. Stay where you're good at. And so instead she has to work to kind of defy those stereotypes and work her way up in the system. And I feel like Jinshi's kind of like that, where maybe he wants to be recognized for other reasons, but all anybody ever focuses on is his looks. I feel like MaoMao could be somebody that acknowledges him for something else, but that's kind of what's great about this episode is that she is getting to work in the outer court in his palace. So she's going to be able to get to know Jinshi. And so she could be the one to tell Jinshi, hey, I know you think you're just average and all you have are your good looks, but actually, after I've gotten to know you, here's all the things that you do bring to the table that maybe you don't even realize or you don't think that you have. I think there's a good possibility she could get to that point because so far MaoMao has this stereotyped version of Jinshi in her head, the persona he puts on for others, but she's not really seen like the real version of him yet. And he could get sick. He could get the cold or get sick and she's got to nurse him back to health. And see, she can make all this work out. Sure, this could all work out in Jinshi's favor. And so then the emperor raises his glass to Jinshi and he says, I was dissatisfied at first, but I've gotten over it. So he's like, he's not getting what he wants. And so he's basically accepted defeat, basically. He's accepted defeat and is complacent with his position. So to me, it sounds like he wanted certain things like to become like a general or to do certain things. And his mother, the Empress Dowager, and his brother/father were probably like, no, that's not what you're going to do. Instead, you're going to help out the emperor by doing XYZ in the rear palace. And Jinshi's like, But because he's not as strong or as powerful as his brother dad, he's not able to do that. So he can't really challenge him. And so then he just kind of accepts. He's like, my sweet gaze, my sweet voice. He just downs it. I'll use my superior tools to my advantage. So instead, he's like, he's just accepted defeat and decided to make lemonade out of lemons. Which makes Jinshi compare a lot to the concubines and the courtesans. Is that, even though we've considered Jinshi the eunuch, he's actually kind of in the same boat as the courtesans and the concubines, where he's kind of stuck in a prison where he's not able to do what he wants. Which is probably why he kind of relates to Gokyo a lot and likes her. And so it's a little creepy the way the emperor looks at him. And I'm like, is that because he looks like Aduo? Why are you looking at him so creepy? I don't like it. He's like, I'm aware that ultimately I'm just a child floundering on the emperor's palm. Yeah, I mean, he literally is the emperor's child and he's just second rate to him. And he's like, as you wish. I'll manage his rear palace or whatever else he wants. That's the only way I can choose my own path. So he's like, if I go along with the emperor's orders, then that's how I get my freedom, in the most ironic of ways. So Jinshi's interesting because it's kind of like, if he is a eunuch, that's sort of the whole situation of the eunuchs. They work for the emperor, they do whatever he wants, but in that sense, they are able to carve their own path by the freedoms they get through doing that. So he kind of falls alongside with that. And just like a courtesan or just like a concubine, if he goes along the path that's set in front of him, he at least gets to choose how it all goes down. So I don't know if Jinshi's a eunuch or not. If he's not a eunuch and they're letting this man that's the brother / son of the emperor just gallivant around the rear palace, I would think that'd be a scandal. But this is a fictional story, and not everything is entirely based off of Chinese imperial palaces and dynasties, so maybe it's not as big of a deal as what I think it is. So who knows? But if MaoMao keeps thinking he's a eunuch and he is not a eunuch, then girl needs to find out. Girl needs to figure out he's not a eunuch and figure that out. Like, she's working in the outer court in his palace. Maybe she'll see him come out of the bath and see some things. Maybe she'll see that. Maybe he'll turn around and be like, oh, and she'll notice. Although that might be too much and that might put her in danger. So that probably won't happen. But maybe she'll like see between the cracks, like a Porky situation. I don't know. I just don't want there to be that confusion after this season. I'm like, just tell us if he's a eunuch or not, damn it, show. Gah! So I don't know. I'm gonna ride the fence on this until the end of the season and see what it gives us. But so this OP is really good. I love the ED. The ED from Jinshi's perspective. Oh, love. I feel like the OP and the ED, we're gonna get more on Jinshi this second half. We got a lot on MaoMao the first half. Maybe we're gonna get a lot on Jinshi this second half, which would be really nice. I feel like Jinshi is I feel like their conversation is prepping for the new concubine that's replacing Aduo. Maybe that's what it is. Who knows? We'll see. I do like this OP. It's a lot different than the first one. I might like the first OP a little bit better. I definitely like the second ED better though, because it's, Jinshi's perspective. But so, oh man, getting to see Jinshi get ready in the morning, this not morning person, and Jinshi listening up. This one shot of Jinshi and her out and about in the city, and he looks like he's like got a fat suit on maybe, and they're out, he's got regular clothes on. I need this episode. I need this episode. I hope that happens this season. That's super adorable. And then the blue roses dying. Interesting. And they're dying in front of this doctor/minister character. I don't know how I feel about him. He seems sketch. He seems very sketch. I don't know. And then there's the go board. There's the blue rose. There's also there's a blue rose, and then there's a baby. There's a woman painting her nails. There's a woman standing up from a coffin. I'm like, what is going to happen this second half? What? I'm so curious. And then there are the three princesses. Gyokyo's little daughter, she is getting so big. She's so cute. And then we see, I think, a preview of the new concubine who looks very intriguing. Maybe her flower is a lily, which is poison. So we'll have to see. And then there's MaoMao. What I do love best is that Jinshi and her look back at each other instead of just him looking at her. I do love that. So yeah, so she's getting all of her stuff together to go work where she thinks she's going to the rear palace, but that is not the case. And they give her all of these different makeups and things. And she talks about the one princess, Mei. So she's like, Mei is old enough where she could consider retiring. Which I feel like most courtesans, by the time they're probably mid-30s, that seems probably likely because, your looks start to change so much. But what I do like is that she says that she, her popularity hasn't waned because she's smart. And she can play Go. through song, chess, and Go, she can play and do things that don't necessarily require beauty. Because honestly, here's the thing. A lot of older men would probably go to her just so she'd play Go with them. She wouldn't have to be the most beautiful woman in the world. She's just giving them her time. And a lot of them probably just want someone's time. And if they're mildly attractive, even better. So I'm sure that that's where her kind of like her backup plan is. If girls got to have some money to live past 50, then that may help her. So Joka and Perrin are the other two. I love that their voices are they're on a big spectrum. Like Joka's voice is pretty deep, which I thought was really nice. They all sound beautiful, of course. And they're like, well, we're glad you found a good workplace. Go make a fortune and send us customers. I'm like, aw. They all treat her like just like a little lamb that they're letting out in the wilderness. Give us some rich boys. And she's like, sure. I was honestly, if I'm being real with y'all, I was expecting her to get jumped by one of the guys in the alleyway, especially with her having that like bag full of stuff. But luckily that was not the case. So I am a little bit sad she's not going back to the rear palace because I wanted to see Gokyo again and I wanted to see all the other women. But I have a feeling if she's working for Jinshi and they have events and things like that, then she will see them eventually roaming around, right? I feel like that'll be the case, especially since she's not technically a court lady. She's just Jinshi's servant, which is hilarious. I love that Jinshi's like, I'm not letting you go just because you failed this exam. You're going to work for me. Which is actually hilarious. So the sad part is when she goes home that she sees her dad. And you can tell that MaoMao is upset because she doesn't want to leave her dad alone. And I was like, show, if you kill him this season, I will be upset. I will be so upset because they've dropped these little red flags. They're like, oh, he's like, I'm like, don't you dare. He like looks frail. He looks so much frailer in this episode than he has all the other seasons. And I'm like, don't you dare. Don't you do this. And plus they've made a point of, now that we know he's a eunuch, of pointing out that he is kind of frail. He's not doing a lot of manual labor. It's like, I'm like, leave him alone, show. Don't you dare hurt him. Right? And so he's like, oh, you've got all your stuff there. And she's like, well, I need my mortal, my pestle, my notebook. And he's like, oh no. He's like, girl, you can't bring that stuff with you to the palace. He's like, you're going to be put to work. He's like, your days of having all the freedom as the apothecary are not exactly going to be this way. So he's like, you're going to have to figure out something else. And he's like, you're not a doctor, so having things with you like that would make you appear like you're plotting to poison someone. I'm glad he said that to her because he knows from working in the rear palace how very easily the things you have and the things you do can instantly be used against you. So he's like, you don't want to bring anything with you that's going to draw suspicion. And I'm glad he says that. And I felt bad for MaoMao because I'm like, she wants to bring all her apothecary things, but I'm also like, girl, you're going to go stay with Jinshi. He's going to give you whatever you want, just even if he has to be subtle about it, right? So I was like, you'll be fine. It'll be okay. And he's like, now don't make that decision. Don't make that face. It was your decision to go. You can't back out now. You should be able to gradually get permission to bring more things in as you're trusted. And as he's like, struggling with the fire and making it warmer, you can tell she's like, I'm going to be leaving him alone during winter. What if he's cold? What if he's sick? What do I do? But she made this choice because she had that desire to go back. It's so, what I like about this series a lot is that they present her choices very realistic. And it's a hard choice because it's like, do you stay in the brothel and risk the chance of being sold out to someone else? Or do you go back to the palace, but you're also risking not being around your dad? Honestly, in hindsight, I think I would have chosen the same as MaoMao because even though she would have been able to stay with her dad a little bit longer had she not gone with Jinshi, there's no guarantee that brothel woman wouldn't have been like, let's sell you out. And then she would have had to leave her dad anyway. At least the decision she made, she gets the opportunity to come back and forth and see him. So I think it was the right choice in the long run, but it does make you question like all the pros and cons of what she's going to do. And the way they made him look like a damn Victorian waif as he's just sitting there being like, oh, you haven't done this in a long time, and snuggled up like a baby. I'm like, that's because she's afraid you're going to freeze to death in this winter. So don't do that, sir. Don't do that. And he's like, well, we'll be lonely again. She's like, this time I can come back whenever I want. And I love that he like pats her head and he's like, right, you can come home anytime you want to. Oh. And then she says, I have no mother. So we don't know anything from that. She basically says there, I have no mother, and I was raised by this man. I have a caring dad, a nosy old granny, and then the 3 sisters. So I wish we knew more about the mom, but it's fine. I have my theories, but we'll see if the show gives us anything on there. Maybe she was just an orphan abandoned and they picked her up off the streets. Who knows? And a lively group of big sisters to keep me company. I can come home anytime. Oh. So, of course, the moment that Jinshi sees her, she's all done up. She's got her makeup on. She has the beautiful roses. I love her bunny buns. They're like a bow, but it's like buns made into a bow, but they kind of look like bunny ears. They're super cute. Of course, Jinshi would be like, and here's the problem. I'm kind of with Jinshi. I want her to just be his. I don't want any of these other guys to notice her. Because here's the thing. Jinshi and MaoMao are perfect for each other. She is not at all remotely interested in men. She's just like, she wants to make her experiments, do her thing, and go. And Jinshi hates how all of these women and men flock to him because of his looks, except MaoMao. So they're actually kind of perfect for each other because MaoMao, she just wants to experiment, but she likes Jinshi's company. So there you go. And then Jinshi, he hates being fawned over for his looks, and he has this like sense of duty to protect MaoMao, like giving her the hairpin, being like, oh, well, I wish that people hadn't tried to like hurt you. I'll keep you safe, all of this. And I feel like MaoMao would let him indulge in that. And she'd be like, okay, you want to protect me? I guess. Sure. As long as I can just walk around. Don't expect anything from it. And he'll be like, and meanwhile, he is kind and considerate to her and wouldn't take advantage of her. So, which is not what she wants. So it's a win-win situation. They're perfect for each other. But I'm with Jinshi. I don't like all of these guys suddenly noticing her. And she's like, well, this is all your fault. She says, I got a lot of unwanted attention because of this. And of course, he like looks like he wants to say something, but he's like, well, that's because you're beautiful. But he doesn't say it. And I'm like, I get why he doesn't say it, but at the same time, I feel like there's a part of Jinshi that he's like, if he tells MaoMao she's beautiful because she's kind of dense and doesn't get anything else of the cues that he's giving off, I'm afraid if he tells her that she's beautiful, she'll be like, oh, gross. No, I don't want anything to do with you. And he's afraid of messing it up. And I'm like, honestly, from reading Scumvillain Self-Saving System, MaoMao and Jinshi are 2 sides of the lead protagonist Shin Ching-cho. They're 2 sides of it. One side is the oblivious side that Jinshi loves her, and that's MaoMao's side. The other side is the part that's eternally tortured. And that's Jinshi's side. So if you want to see a character that's Jinshi and MaoMao mashed together, go read Scumvillain Self-Saving System, and you will get that. But yeah, just the 2 of them, she's like, what is it? And he's like, nothing. Like, he's like, I don't want to say it. And I love that Gao Xun's just like, he's like, what can we do? Now, of course, all the guards notice her. It's a thing. And Jinshi's just like, he's like, as soon as we get back, you need to change back in your freckles and your robes and clothes. And normally I could see somebody being like, oh, don't let Jinshi tell her what to do. But MaoMao doesn't want to be dressed up anyway. So Jinshi loves her despite how she chooses to dress. And MaoMao is perfectly fine with this. So anyway, we have this mysterious minister. I don't think he's a doctor. I think he's a minister, but I want to see what we've got with this going on. He's by a go board. He needs to meet one of the princesses to help play Go with him. That's who he needs to meet. If he can become a customer over in that brothel and play Go with her, I think that this sourpuss would be a happy camper. He seems like a grump, and he seems like he's gonna stir shit and cause drama. I'm just calling it now. He seems like the antagonist of this season. Maybe not. Who knows? But I don't know if he's doing like dealings in and out of the palace. There was the scene with the opium pipe that was given out. I don't know if maybe he's like distributing drugs. I don't know. In the book, The Last Eunuch in China, the eunuchs weren't allowed to have like the high quality opium that the nobility was allowed to have. They kind of got the scraps, if they were even allowed to have any at all. And a lot of them ended up becoming addicted to opium based on like the low quality stuff that got passed around. So I don't know if that story is going to touch on that this season, but it's interesting. But he's all by himself with that Go board. To me, what that symbolizes is that he's bored. He has no one to challenge him, no one to play against him. And I feel like MaoMao is going to become that for him in this season. We could see, but I don't know how that's going to pan out. We'll see how that goes. But he's sitting there playing Go against himself. And they're like, I heard the manager of the rear palace. See, and then they don't say like Emperor's brother. They don't say the Dowager's son. They don't say any of that. They say the manager of the rear palace brought a courtesan from the Verdigris house, where the famous princesses are. And he says, that house. So I wonder if this guy knows MaoMao's dad from all that went down and knows the connection between MaoMao's dad and the house and the brothel. There's something there. There's something going on. I'm curious. I also love that Gao Shun's like, oh my God. And Jinshi's like, no, no. Also, to add to the drama, these men that are in all of the outer houses and everything near Jinshi, I'm assuming are not necessarily eunuchs. If they're military men, they don't have to be eunuchs. So now we have to worry about this. At least when they were all eunuchs, it's like, well, none of them are going to bother MaoMao. But now it's like, oh shit, some of them could bother MaoMao. And Jinshi's going to be panicking about it. He's like, don't look at her. So his house is crazy. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buildings and like 3 or 4 pavilions in his home. It's bougie. It is bougie. And the fact that Suiren runs this whole like entire system like a fine oiled ship and she cracks the whip, would not mess with Suiren. You saw her like get that charcoal and crush it up. I thought it was a man at first. I thought when we cut to the charcoal getting ripped apart, I thought it was a man doing it. And then you cut to her and she's like, oh, hello, crunch. I was like, ah! Like Suiren is, she's badass bitch. I wouldn't mess with her. No, 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 no. Trust and believe the Empress Dowager is not just going to leave anybody managing Jinshi. No, no. I want to know how her and Gao Shun got assigned to Jinshi, but I don't know if we're going to get that information in this episode or season or not. And so MaoMao thought she was going to return to the rear palace, and Gao Shun's like, oh, no, no. Gao Shun's like, well, you were fired. You can't just go back. He's like, then everybody else would want their position back. He's like, no. He's like, you can come back here, but you're not going to work in the rear palace. He's like, no, you're going to work for Master Jinshi. You're going to work in the outer court now. So you have the rear palace, and then you have, I mean, it's like a city in itself, right? There's so much going on. She's like, the outer court. The rear palace is considered the inner court, and the outer court lies outside of that. There are many public offices, and he's like, I'll show you around later. So we're going to get into a lot more politics, probably going to get into a lot more of the management and business side of things. The rear palace was like the luxury. It was like the garden where all the flowers were, and this is going to be the seedy underbelly where the real shit goes down. And I'm kind of excited about that. I'm like, yeah, let's see what happens here. Okay. I do like the idea that as seedy and crazy as it probably will get this season with where they're going, that Jinshi's place is going to kind of be like a sanctuary for her to go back to, where if something bad goes down, she can come back here and be safe. Presumably. The Emperor doesn't seem interested in MaoMao right now, which is a good thing. I love Suiren. She's great. She's like, look at the welcome home. It must have been cold where you were. I'm like, uh-huh. I also love that Jinshi and MaoMao have little matching coats. They have the fur-lined capes, and one's black and one's white. Yes, please. All here for it. Also, she has like green and red, and he has like gold and purples and blues. The color combinations, they're doing it for me. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I am his attendant. You must be Zhao Mao. I love when she says Zhao Mao, and then she looks over at Gao Shun like, did you tell her this nickname? And he's like, yeah, I kind of did. Gao Shun and Suiren are going to know all the secrets, and they're going to figure out, I'm sure, within one episode that Jinshi loves MaoMao now that she's in his vicinity. But I honestly really like this because not only is it a sanctuary for MaoMao if things get crazy, but MaoMao needs to get to know Jinshi, and Jinshi needs to get to know MaoMao. Right now in the rear palace, there were all of these illusions. It was a bird cage. There were these facades. Now it's more out in the open, and it's a chance for the two of them to connect better and to get to know one another without any interruptions. And I'm really looking forward to that. So that's kind of what I want. I want them to get to know each other more, which is great. So yeah. So there's two separate buildings, one with the office and one with the personal residence. And the area head is the young master's room, but you're not allowed there. And she's like, young master? I'm like, MaoMao, how do you not know who he is? How do you not know? And she's like, well, you should be all right. And she's like, what? So she goes to this one room, and there's like books and everything. It's a nice little bedroom. And she's like, I really would like a stove. I'm like, girl, you've got some balls to ask for a stove and a well. And I don't know why she said stable. What does she say there? She's like, oh, it's about the size of the one I had at the Jade Pavilion. Interesting. She's like, cool. She's like, if this place had a stove and a nearby well, it'd be perfect. I'm like, girl, you're getting too spoiled. And she's like, this place seems too well built for a servant girl's quarters. I'm like, well, no, you are quite right in that. I was getting, again, Scum Villain Self-Saving System. I was getting Bamboo House flashbacks from this, being like, well. And so then Gao Shun's like, let's go about. So Jinshi says he's not intending to make her do servant labor. And she's like, but why? He's like, you're going to work in the outer court, so you need to take the outer court exam. And she's like, really? Suiren does a lot, and that's when she reveals that she's the only one working in the whole palace for Jinshi, or at least in his house. So she says they had some new girls a few times, but that didn't work out. And I figured it was because the new girls that came to work for him instantly fell in love with him and fawned over him and tried to get with him. And Jinshi was like, no, we can't do that. So she says, but well, things happen and they don't last. Now, when she says things happen and they don't last, that can mean a lot of things. That can mean they could have affairs with the military men and they have to leave, or they decide that they don't like the fact that they can't get with Jinshi and they leave. Whatever the case may be. Because then MaoMao's like, what do you mean? She's like, well, did they lace his food with aphrodisiacs? I love that MaoMao's like, what would I do? Not that she would, but she's like, would they try to poison him or get him to sleep with him? She's like, what did they do? She's like, did they try to steal things? She's like, who likes finding unfamiliar underwear in their closet? And then MaoMao's like, what? She's like, on top of that, it was made of hair. And I was like, wait, what? Is that like a jock strap with hair in it? And MaoMao's like, oh. So I need to know. Okay. So I just wanted to find out what was with the underwear. It was just made out of their hair. Why? Luckily, I managed to stay away from spoilers. I was like, I just want to know about the underwear. It was made out of their hair. Of course it was. So, okay. So that solves that question. Thank God. Yay. Answer solved. I was like, you know that meme where there's the mascot that's dodging bombs? I'm like, don't read any spoilers. I just want to know about the underwear. So I guess women were trying to get with Jinshi, and which, you know what, if you're a bunch of fangirls and you're trying to get with Harry Styles and you were in the same house as him, I get it. That's some celebrity parasocial stuff there. And she's like, oh, how creepy. That sounds like a lot. So yeah, Jinshi, girl, MaoMao, he's so hot. Hansel's so hot right now. Like he just looks so good. And he's not a morning person, so he has this really cute little disheveled look and he's all blushy. And she's like, wow, he's not a morning person. And I'm like, damn it, MaoMao. Damn it. She's like, I could see why Master Gaoshun and only Lady Suiren enter the room. Gaoshun is just stoically standing there like, I hate my life. I hate what this all is. Jinshi is so blushy and he's trying to like, he's putting on a show for MaoMao and she's just like, She's like, a woman who saw this would lose herself so easily and a man would pounce him right away. He truly has sin-inducing air about him. I'm like, girl, do you realize what you're saying? I'm like, MaoMao, do you realize what you're saying? But she's freaking Sherlock Holmes. So unless it's helping her solve detective cases or finding poisons, she's just like, well, isn't that nice? I'm just like, but that's what he likes about her. So we can't get too mad at it. And he's like, sort of like an insect in mating season. And then I'm like, girl. And at first when she said that, I was like, there you go. You just think of Jinshi like an insect or like a root and you'll be set, right? But that's not what she thinks of. Instead, she's like, well, I wonder if I can collect this eunuch scent and sell it as an aphrodisiac. I'm like, girl, are you in denial or do you really think that he's a eunuch? Because I don't know. I feel like she is in the ultimate stage of denial. It feels like a damn Don Mai by MXTX, where she is trying her hardest to be like, this eunuch, he has like a whole mansion and a personal attendant, and he doesn't have to live with the other eunuchs. But I don't know. It's like she's creating her own red herrings, and I'm like, bitch, no. So anyway, and then Jinshi's like, oh, you're looking awful contemplative over there. Is something wrong? She's like, I could get you a new room if you want. And Gaoshun's like, no, don't know. She's like, well, what brings this about? He's like, I don't get it, but is this my chance to get a stove and a well? And then she looks over at Gaoshun, and Gaoshun's like, do not request another room. Gaoshun is like, do not request another room. Don't do it. He's going to sit you like right. I feel like Jinshi's like, I could get you a room that's closer to mine. And I feel like Gaoshun's like, don't you dare. Don't you do it, girl. This is going to be dangerous. And what does she do? She's like, well, he needs to clearly communicate if I'm going to understand. I'm like, MaoMao. And she's like, she's like, well, I can manage the stove somehow. So for starters. And then she's like, well, could I have a stable with a well nearby? I don't know why she said stable. I don't know why she wanted to stay where horses are. And of course, Gaoshun's like, are you serious? And Jinshi's like, no stables. And she's like, fine. So he takes her on a walk about. This is the thing, though. She's in her clothes, like her regular everyday clothes. Jinshi, after hearing her story about why she wears the freckles and everything, I feel like Jinshi now completely understands after seeing her be all dolled up. He gets it. He's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about these other guys looking at you. I don't want that. So he totally understands it now. But I think there's another component to it. We just got to get to it. So I like that, again, MaoMao's learning about Jinshi. She thought that he had nothing to do. He was always loitering around. And then she finds out, wow, he actually does a lot. And he's just like, I'm stuck doing all this paperwork for my brother father that I normally would not have to do. Why do I have to do this? I feel like also if you've watched Heaven Official's Blessing, then you also know like he kind of has like a Junwoo. Or not Junwoo, he has, oh gosh, she's like, she does all the work. Her name is escaping me. But he is like her character. She's like, he's actually pretty busy. Poor him. She's like, there are many military officers on the east side of this area. And Gaoshun's like, please stay away. I like that Gaoshun's like, look, you have no idea how unhinged Jinshi will become if you go over there and get involved in all that. So stay away from them. And she's like, okay, sure. But there's a lot of places to go to. She's like, there's more than 10 different buildings and areas that she needs to go and see. And she's like, this is a lot. She's like, am I going to learn all of these? Then she also talks about the herbs and everything. And how when her dad was in the rear palace, he had transplanted all those medicinal herbs. And she's like, now I don't exactly have the same ones that reminded of him around. However, she does find a lot of other herbs and she's like, oh, cool. Well, I think that MaoMao will find things that will be new for her and develop those tastes and develop that curiosity again, but she's just got to have the chance to find them. Anyway, so they go back and she meets some of the other court ladies that are around the outer court of the palace. And basically they're secretaries. So they're basically secretaries, but it's like, I feel they have a little bit more freedom than a traditional servant. They're treated more as kind of, to me, it seems like they're not nobility, but the court ladies are kind of women who have worked their way up to get to this position. So you kind of have like the concubines. If you had like a pyramid, I guess would be the way to describe it. You've got the emperor up here and you have the empress beside him, theoretically. Then you would have the concubines and the officials. Then you'd probably have the court ladies in this. I don't know. The concubines I'd like to put up there because they're close to the emperor, but they could also be down here. So it's kind of like, it depends on the hierarchy, I suppose. And then you have the eunuchs down there with them, right? So essentially the court ladies, they're not necessarily, they established that the handmaidens and the eunuchs, a lot of them are poor or from poverty or were kidnapped and they're against their will. So a lot of them were uneducated and they didn't have like basic literacy skills. But the court ladies are essentially secretaries. So they do have literacy skills. They can read. MaoMao can read. So logically, she would be able to be a court lady. Now, not being a servant and being a court lady means she's up a little bit higher status. It would make sense if Jinshi was like, I don't want to take you back to the rear palace because we've already done that song and dance. We can't take you back there. Otherwise, it might cause a fuss, and I don't want to draw any attention to you, especially now that he's gotten to know her more. So he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll just bring you back to my place, and then I'll have you become a court lady. But what if he was like, if you become a court lady, you're kind of high up on the pyramid here. You're a normal working class citizen now. You're a court lady. Oh my gosh. And what would happen if you got to be a court lady and got to get with me? And it would make sense because you're you're not nobility, but you're just a step below it. So that would work out great, wouldn't it? And it would work out because MaoMao is smart enough to be a court lady, except she has no desire to do that. So she doesn't do well on the test because, as she says, she's like, when it's stuff I'm not interested in, I don't really learn it well. And I'm like, there's a part of me that definitely does think that MaoMao could definitely be neurodivergent because she misses some social cues. And she also is very like Sherlock Holmes, very like focused on this one thing and kind of misses all the stuff around it. So that would not surprise me at all. But I'm like, Jinshi was trying to set up this romance of you two getting together and you just screwed it up, girl, by not passing the exam. And she's like, I guess I'll just be your servant. And he's like, like, you're not helping out. One thing I do like is that MaoMao does not let these women bother her. She's like, these women, you know, they think that they're a little bit more elitist than the handmaidens that I've been working with. So they wouldn't clean up something like this because they're above it. And I like that they try to, here's the thing, they came after MaoMao. MaoMao just defended herself. She just was super blunt and they smacked her. And then she's like, well, you know, if you're going to make fun of me, you guys all clearly like Jinshi. So what does that say about Jinshi in your eyes? If Jinshi wants me to work for him, are you saying that he's in poor taste? Are you saying that he's blind? Are you saying he made a mistake? And because they don't want to admit that about Jinshi, then she kind of corners them, right? Except for Sailor Neptune over here, the one girl, she's like, you know, why would a heavenly maiden of a person fall for an ugly girl like me? Now, here's the thing. Again, her and Jinshi, they're made for each other. They both sell each other short so much. MaoMao calls herself ugly. Jinshi calls himself average. And neither of them are that at all. But they have this esteem issue that they both think that they are. And it's like, you bitches. No. But I'm like, girl, again, giving off all the MXTX Don My vibes where she's like, well, he's just the most handsome thing alive, but why would he be with me? And I'm like, girl, I just want Gao Shun to shake her gently by the shoulders and be like, he loves you, damn it. Why don't you understand? And she'd be like, oh. But this one girl that's to the side that is not impressed by any of them. Here's my thing. I don't know. And I don't want to stereotype based on her appearance and how they animate her, but is she transgender? And I only say that I don't want to stereotype her because of her eyebrows being like, you know, she has like deeper set eyes and the way that her eyebrows are, and she doesn't have, you know, she does not have a chest. She's pretty flat, which means nothing because MaoMao is too. So that's not necessarily the case. I don't know. It feels like one of two things. Either she's hiding that she's transgender, or is she related to the guy that's the minister playing Go by himself? Because they kind of have similar hair, maybe. This series does a thing where if characters are related, they kind of have similar hair or looks. So maybe? She also told MaoMao to leave the area where the minister was. So I think it's one of three things. Either she's actually she's transgender and does not want other people knowing about that, or she is the daughter or related to the minister and doesn't want MaoMao messing with him for reasons, or maybe she's being used or being involved with the minister and doesn't want MaoMao to get caught up with him either. She definitely seems suspicious of MaoMao, where she thinks that MaoMao's putting on a game and she's just like she sees through her. If she is, because she's the only one that doesn't get riled up like the other court ladies. And also she's a bit taller than the other court ladies. But again, I don't want to generalize or stereotype because maybe she's just a tall woman. I don't know. This series does things with gender and subverting your expectations. So I don't know. I don't want to say that she's transgender, but she could be. I don't know. I'm counting my chickens before they hatch. But then she definitely seems like she's on to MaoMao, like something's up. And then MaoMao shows them her burns. She's like, I tried out some burn medicine the other day, so it's really messed up right now. And she's like, that heavenly maiden has a heavenly heart. No, she's making fun of Jinshi, but what MaoMao doesn't realize is that he absolutely does have a heart. He absolutely would, if he saw her burns, he would completely like get on one knee and like kiss the wounds better, which I would not be opposed to seeing. But she's like, he gives me a way to make a living. And so they all leave kind of being like, oh, poor woe is her. But the one, she's just like, Sailor Neptune's like, I don't know. I feel like you're making all that up. She's like, and then that's when Jinshi's like, oh, interesting proclivities, are we? And he's like, do you get harassed like that a lot? And he's like, why are you raising your left arm? So he didn't see the burns. I'm like, I want her to show him, but damn it. It's raining so hard outside. Anyway, there's actually like the remnants of a hurricane coming through, so fun times. But she tries to study for the exam, but instead she gets distracted by the insect. But I will tell you what, Suiren like peeking through the door being like, you're being too loud. I was like, shit. They're gonna get nothing accomplished romantically because Suiren ain't gonna have that shit. Shh. I love Suiren. I love her so much. So she ends up failing the exam, surprising no one. She's like, why did you think I would pass? And he's like, because you're smart, but damn it, there should have been questions about bugs and poisons on there and you would have been great. But she's not bothered by it because she doesn't realize what he's trying to do. And instead she goes on and finds the medicinal herbs down the hallway and then the hill with the special herbs. Now the thing about it is, Sailor Neptune shows up and she's like, hey, this ain't like the rear palace where you can just walk around wherever you like and pick whatever you want and everybody tolerates it because you're a little apothecary. They're like, no, there are rules here and you're in places you shouldn't be. So I'm super curious, what's the deal with Sailor Neptune? What's her deal? What she got with MaoMao? That minister was there when she left, so I don't even know. And then we see someone handing someone an opium pipe. So mysterious, mysterious, mysterious. What I think is interesting about the ED is we have Jinshi like posing next to the window, just like a concubine would, like looking out wistfully, wanting his life to be different, but this is what it is. I don't know if it's Jinshi. It looks like a military man with a cane that's being given the pipe. Curious. But it looks like, is it a woman giving it to him? Because their nails are longer? Interesting. It's a military man getting the pipe, and someone with nails gives it to him. The minister looks a bit sinister. I don't know how I feel about him. He also can't grow a mustache, which is a bad sign. And he has ghetto hair, so I don't know how to feel about that. Ghetto from Jujutsu Kaisen is what I'm meaning. Interesting. I don't know. There was a scent of sandalwood mixed with another distinctly bitter smell. So sandalwood, the thing that makes me also think that maybe she's transgender is that the scents that she's got on her are traditionally like a bitter smell and sandalwood. With sandalwood, I always think of like the men in Donmai. So that's what made me think of that. And then the distinctly bitter smell, I wonder if it's like a chemical or like opium. Maybe she's addicted. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm very curious. But we have that ED and the wistful shot of Jinshi looking out the window, right? It does make me feel sad for him because he seems like he wants to be portrayed as being masculine, as being powerful, and he feels like that's not happening. So I feel for him. I also feel for him because this series is going to torture him through MaoMao's denial/obliviousness. So I've talked over an hour about this show, but I have a feeling, you know what? It's like, we'll figure all this out as we go. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. The funny thing is, Jinshi, I love that you have Jinshi who wants to be known for more than just a pretty face. And MaoMao's the one that would. So I'm just rooting for them, but I feel like things are about to get 20 times harder for them. So, and don't cry, Jinshi. Like, I love the ED, but I don't like Jinshi crying. I'm like, MaoMao needs to be with a tissue to wipe your tears away. So we'll see where that goes. But anyway, I felt like this was a feral discussion, but I'm super excited for episode 14. I hope you all are as well. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with episode 14 of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye!